This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 561, part 2, entitled, How Will Masculists Take Over Gender Politics? Continuing straight on. This attitude of women towards men makes masculists hate such women, seeing them as being profoundly abusive to men. Prepared to manslave a man for 2 decades of his life to pay for a kid he never wanted in the first place. If a woman is incapable of seeing the massive injustice of this attitude, then it's not surprising that masculists hate such women and punish them severely by effectively annihilating them, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless and spat at for being vile, man-slaving cunts. Masculists want laws changed so that undesired paternity is ruled out from the culture. Masculists demand the establishment of GECs, that's GECs, Gender Equality Committees, that consist half of feminists and half of masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally in the parliaments, which is certainly not the case today, which is yet another example of gender bias in favour of women that makes masculists full of burning hatred at the massive discrimination by society of men. These GECs would then change gender laws so that the divorce courts are reformed, so that they are made men fair. Alimony would be thrown out with the expectation that women are fips who can pull their own financial weight and not expect fluffy style to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus making her a hated fluffy, a manslaving, divorce-raping vermin parasite. Custody of kids will be made joint, so that young men no longer reason that they have a 1 in 4 chance of losing custody of their kids in a hated, fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system. So they think, quote, fuck that. So they will not marry and refuse to have kids, since they utterly reject these hated, fluffy feminists who so badly fuck up the lives of married fathers. The divorce courts will be made to operate under the principle of financial independence of both sexes as part of the general strategy of the masculists to create a FIP society in which all women are socialised to be FIPs or to rot on the shelf. The GECs will legislate the para so that men have the same right to reject an unwanted pregnancy as women. The fact that women have the mara but men don't have the para is seen by the masculists as the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, and generates powerful hatred in masculists against the hypocrisy of the feminists who powerfully support the mara and yet oppose the legislation of the para. Masculists have a hatred of such hypocrisy and spit at such women. The masculist politicians in the GECs will also push for the legislation of the OPTAB, that's OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to counter women's paternity fraud, lying to their man that the kid growing in her is his when she knows it's not. Masculists have a real hatred against such women who are so callous and abusive that they expect their man to be manslaved by them for 2 decades of his life to pay for a kid that is not even his. Masculists have an utter contempt and hatred for such women who commit such a major and callous gender crime against a man. Masculists want such women to be put behind bars for 15 years, in brackets, a greater crime than rape, which typically gets a man 10 years in jail. These paternity frauding women will be forced to work in jail to pay for their incarceration costs and for the cost of their kid that she will be given total financial responsibility for. With the para, once the man learns that the kid is not his, he can fill in the government para form. and hence be freed from any financial obligation to pay for the kid that is not his. If he is outraged by her massive gender crime against him, then if he can prove her criminality, then he can put her behind bars for 15 years. Women who commit pill lying are also massive gender criminals against men, and also hated by the masculists. Millions of women lie to their boyfriends, husbands, about taking the pill, but aren't, get pregnant, then force the man to pay for a kid he doesn't want. Hence the masculists push for the legislation of the para, so that he's not subject to the massive level of gender criminality by such a callous and hateable female who commits this diabolical gender crime against men. He takes out the para, and then the ball is in the woman's court. She can either choose to abort, so the issue is settled, or she can take the pregnancy to term, in which case, since the man has taken the para, she then has full responsibility for the costs of the kid. If she's a FIP, she can afford it, which is one of the many reasons why masculist theorists place such emphasis on the importance of the fipping of women, so that women can afford not to parasite off the money and labour of men, which will only earn them the hatred of men, as most men become masculisted, influenced by the power of masculist arguments. Now jump well into the coming decade, by which time the above masculist ideas will be widely known in society, and especially by men, by the large majority of men who have been masculisted. Now imagine what such a masculist collective hatred towards the gender criminality of women will cause. We will see vicious verbal confrontations between monoconscious feminists who have been brainwashed all their lives that gender oppression is a one-way street, and that women have a right to be angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, patriarchy, etc. So feel they have a right to be publicly angry at men for men's gender crimes against women. But to the masculists, who are bi-conscious, such monoconscious anger by feminists will be seen as bigotry, as closed-mindedness towards the idea that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men far worse than vice versa, as shown clearly above with women's big three gender crimes against men. So one can readily imagine that when there are half a dozen masculists in the audience of a feminist talk, that these masculists will attack the feminist speaker with a verbally vicious, hateful, masculist harangue, pointing out to her that women oppress men far worse, and that her monoconsciousness is hated and seen as old-fashioned and callous, that will cause her to lose her boyfriend, since masculists now target these boyfriends, teaching them masculist ideas, so that they become bi-conscious. So that if their monoconscious feminist girlfriends do not become bi-conscious faster than their boyfriends, then their bi-conscious boyfriends will see the monoconscious attitudes of their feminist girlfriends as bigoted and become disgusted with them and then dump them. So over the next decade, millions of monoconscious feminists are going to go through a lot of pain as they lose their boyfriends, who will not tolerate the monoconscious bigotry of their feminist girlfriends. These monoconscious feminists will then notice that their ex-boyfriends are pairing off with bi-conscious feminists, who are a lot nicer to be with for men, since monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy towards men, since feminism teaches women that men oppress women, and says nothing to women about how women oppress men. So monoconscious feminists do not have their monoconscious bitchery against men cancelled by a corresponding masculist hatred of the gender criminality of women against men. Bi-conscious feminists are thus much nicer to be with for men, So not surprisingly, bi-conscious masculists hugely prefer to have relationship with bi-conscious feminists and leave a monoconscious feminazi type feminists rotting on the shelf in all their monoconscious bigotry and ignorance. So within a decade, it's likely that there will be millions of bi-conscious masculists who will make their presence strongly felt in society, in public meetings, in feminist talks, in masculist talks, expressing their collective male hatred at how women badly oppress men. This collective masculist hatred at gender criminal women will be so powerful that it will be unstoppable and will sweep everything aside that stands in its path. When men become collectively angry and hateful at women, then God help women. They will be powerless. There's an asymmetry between men and women when it comes to expression of verbal violence. Women have to be careful with their expression of verbal violence towards men, since if they cause a man to explode in rage at the woman, then with his 3 times greater strength across the chest than a woman, he is in a position to break her jaw with a single bitch slap, that is, a slap across the face, delivered by a man to a woman with full male force. When masculists now express powerful anger and hatred at women for the massive gender crimes that women commit against men, then men do not have to hold back the way women do, since men have the assurance that they are much stronger than women and can truly let fly their masculine hatred of women's massive gender crimes against men. With a dozen masculists in a public talk expressing this kind of collective masculine hatred against women's gender crimes, there will be nothing that can withstand such a male tirade. It will inevitably triumph, and the masculists will thus take over gender politics and force women to become bi-conscious, or they will be wiped out of society, spat at, rejected, made manless, and utterly pariahed. Young women will be terrified of this happening to them, so they will become powerfully motivated to become bi-conscious, or they will fear that their lives will be ruined by very angry, hateful, masculisted men, who over the next decade will be most men, given the rate at which masculist and MGTOW ideas are spreading across the planet, thanks to the manosphere, in brackets, that is men, talking together about the injustices of the traditional male role on the internet, close brackets. With most men having become hateful masculists, there's nothing that women can do. Masculist hatred will then simply take over gender politics. I see no way round this. It seems inevitable to me. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women. An e-textbook of 560 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.